Anuradha Mittal, our next speaker. She is the founder and executive director of Oakland Institute, and she has been following all the different struggles in Africa and Latin America. And Anuradha, thank you so much for being here again. You have support Solnot all in past editions, and we are very, very honored to have you today. I'm sorry, it's still early. And we would like to know about what's going on with land grabbing around the world, ¿verdad? So how this is related to the current context of corporations taking everything that they can, and what can we do to prevent it, or how we can get involved with this. So Anuradha, welcome again to Solnot Oil. I think you are ready, right? Thank you so much for being here, Anuradha.
Thank you, Miguel and Mark, and greetings everyone from Oakland. I've had the opportunity to be at previous conferences, so it is sad that I don't get to be with you in person, but greetings from everyone at the Oakland Institute. Yes, we find ourselves amidst a pandemic, and the pandemic-related shutdown and slowdown impacting lives and livelihoods of the most marginalized around the world has not slowed down the environmental and climate crisis. Deforestation, desertification, pollution, loss of biodiversity, and more continues at an alarming rate, which is jeopardizing lives and livelihoods of billions. Humanity, we are told, has a decade to reduce global emissions by half, or we will rocket past a global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius, a disastrous outcome and a point of no return. Instead of taking meaningful action, governments, corporations, international financial institutions like the World Bank are wanting to exploit even more of our limited valuable natural resources like land. They use the euphemism-based narrative of putting it into productive use or unlocking the economic potential of land for economic progress and so-called development. To attract private investment, governments are marketing hundreds of millions of hectares of land as being unused and available without consideration of those whose livelihoods and lives depend on it. We saw this trend take off, we at the Institute, following the 2007-2008 high food price crisis and the financial crisis. Looking for the next commodity to invest in, investors, including private equity funds, retirement funds, even mercenaries like Eric Prince, swarmed in to take over lands, especially in the global south. This phenomenon of land grabbing and its impact has been revealed and challenged by many organizations, including the Oakland Institute. The false narrative of putting unused land to good use, improving food security, building infrastructure, economic opportunities, has been busted by our research and advocacy. Faced with the threat of land grabbing, communities globally continue to resist. A major part of the land on the planet is still not controlled by private interest. As much as 65% of the world's land area is stewarded by communities under customary systems. Whether it is on legally recognized public land or customary land, billions of people rely on community-managed natural resources for their livelihoods. For most of the humanity, land is a common good, valued as an ancestral asset with social and cultural significance. Local communities and indigenous groups are the stewards of these resources, and they're on the front line in the struggle against land grabbing and destructive practices. They're resisting governments and corporations. They're putting the bodies on the line that want to, against these corporations who want to convert smallholder farms, grasslands, and forests onto monoculture plantations, cattle ranches, and mines, which will further contribute to climate crisis. More information on these struggles from Papua New Guinea to Ethiopia to Zambia, DRC, Tanzania to Nicaragua, Argentina, Brazil, they're available on our website. Now, this resistance for protecting biodiversity, for protecting lives and livelihoods, is seen as an obstacle to investment and business. So many governments are being encouraged around the world to adopt the Western capitalist notion of private land ownership. This includes creation of land markets so that the land can be leased and sold and put to so-called productive use to unlock its value. World Bank is a key actor in the push to privatize and commodify land. In 2017, its Enabling the Business of Agriculture report prescribed policy prescriptions to governments in order to enhance the productivity of land use and encourage agribusiness expansion. The role played by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in driving the marketization of land is fully on display in Ukraine, where the IMF leveraged the economic fallout from the pandemic to coerce Europe's breadbasket into creating a land market despite opposition, overwhelming opposition in the country. World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development had done the groundwork for this to happen. In March 2020, Ukraine ended the 19-year-old moratorium on the sale of land in order to qualify for much-needed $5 billion loan package. Farmers, agricultural workers, unions, and the vast majority of the population have been opposed to the creation of a land market because this will allow agribusiness, oligarchs, and private foreign investors to increase their already substantial control over land. Similarly, to unlock the potential of land, in Myanmar, the government has made amendments to the country's vacant, fallow, and virgin land law. Passed in fall 2018, the amendments imposed a 6-month deadline to anyone occupying these lands to apply for a 30-year permit to continue using the land, after which unpermitted lands would be made available for agribusiness, mining, and their purposes. Far from being vacant or fallow, these lands are used by communities for gardens, for orchards and forests, and governed under customary governance system. Those who call these lands home were given this terrible choice of giving up their ancestral claims to the land in exchange for a 30-year permit, or face eviction, fines, and even jail time. Hundreds of civil society groups from ethnic Karen, Kachin, Shan, Chin, Karenni, and Mon communities have expressed their concerns, but the law has already been used to seize community land for palm oil operations. The law also threatens the ability of hundreds of thousands of displaced people and refugees to ever return home. Nearly half of the Rakhine state, where the majority of Myanmar's Rohingya people originate from, is considered VFV land. Similarly, in Papua New Guinea, 97% of the country is under customary land tenure. But the government is making available millions of hectares of land for palm oil, for mining, and timber operations under the guise of unlocking the economic potential of land. Country's most recent development plan aims to move 20% of all land into a formal market by 2022. Yet evidence from the past 4 decades reveals that the takeover of customary land for the exploitation of natural resources has only led to deforestation and environmental degradation, destruction of livelihoods, and increase in conflicts within and between communities. In Brazil, President Bolsonaro has used a pro-business, anti-indigenous rhetoric to garner public support for seizing indigenous land in Brazil. He assumed office in January 2019 after a campaign in which he promised to expand the exploitation of the Amazon, halt the demarcation of indigenous land, and arm ranchers to allow takeover of lands for cattle ranching. Some of his efforts have been blocked in the Congress, but he has succeeded at emboldening politicians and citizens alike, resulting in increased land invasions, killings, violence against indigenous and land rights activists, as well as acceleration of deforestation. It was in this context that in 2019, ranchers set large portions of the Amazon on fire, threatening a multitude of indigenous communities and the ecosystems on which they rely. A key factor in driving this dispossession and environmental catastrophe is the United States of America, through its influence on institutions like the World Bank, IMF, or its own agencies, such as the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC. An agreement between Sri Lanka and the United States, MCC, intends to shift millions of hectares of land into private control. A land project focused on mapping and digitizing state lands has the explicit purpose of stimulating investment and increasing land's use as an economic asset. Civil society groups have called on the government to reject the compact and warned that it will result in land grabs by creditors and transfer of prime land to multinational corporations, and loss of livelihoods for farmers. For dispossessed and ethnic minorities like the Tamils and Muslims, the prospect of the government determining what land is vacant poses an enormous threat, given the country's ugly history of war-related displacement, internal colonization, and landlessness. Perhaps none of this is very surprising, but what has been most shocking in the last couple of years has been the egregious push to privatize and access natural resources via blockchain technology, which has been presented as a silver bullet solution for securing land rights. Nearly 20 governments worldwide are implementing or considering the technology for land registration. Now, let me give you an example of Zambia. At the time of independence in 1964, there was no private land in Zambia. 94% of the land was under customary tenure, and the remaining 6% was under state control. This started to change in the 1990s when the World Bank and the IMF required the government to change its land laws towards privatization as a condition for restructuring its international debt. As a result, Zambia saw a drastic reduction of customary land from 94% to only 60% today. This has shifted the control over land from people to government, thereby making it available for exploitation by private interest. In 2018, the Zambian government started partnership with Medici Land Governance, MLG, a blockchain company which is actually a subsidiary of the US-based online retailer Overstock.com. Yes, let's pause. Overstock.com has a subsidiary which is into blockchain technology, assisting with land registration and titling. The stated goal of the National Land Titling Program is to register all property in the country in order to provide security of tenure to property owners. However, the former CEO of Overstock.com, Patrick Byrne, explained that the use of blockchain for land titles will help unlock trillions of dollars in global mineral reserves that are inaccessible due to unclear land governance systems. In 2018, he signed a multi-country partnership with the World Bank to expand the use of blockchain technology for registering land around the world. Private titles would allow, according to him, and the thinking behind it is, would allow mining companies to enter into agreements with landowners to exploit vast natural resources, ensure that the wealth is extracted through mining is enjoyed by land rights holders and corporations. So under this scenario, Overstock.com would also benefit financially from unlocking this dead capital, though exactly how this would be negotiated remains unknown. What is known in terms of revenue models is that in Zambia, the company expects to receive a cut of the tax revenues generated through government land titling and the resulting increase in taxes. In addition, Byrne has commented that donor countries pay healthy sum for land titling projects, thereby suggesting that international development aid dollars could potentially support Overstock.com subsidiary MLG's efforts globally. This push to privatize land, forest exploitation and extraction is global. The government of DRC is advertising 80 million hectares of arable land. Madagascar is claiming that it has 30 million hectares of agricultural land, that only 10% of it is being used. In Ethiopia, over 3 million hectares of land has been made available for investment. Nigeria boasts availability of arable land across the country. Peru claims 8 million hectares with potential for agricultural crops and 18 million hectares for pastures. Nicaragua is offering over 7 million hectares of land for mining, which is 60% of the country's land surface. Research reveals that private titling has not increased access to credit and loans. The claim that private titles offer tenure security while customary systems remain insecure is often repeated, yet it is not substantiated by evidence. On the contrary, the process of transitioning locally developed customary systems that actually offer tenure security into private title lands will result in social and economic displacement while placing ecosystems at risk. Despite this research, Western aid agencies and international financial institutions fail to recognize the evidence, and they continue to advocate and support the privatization of land and the creation of land markets. The COVID-19 pandemic has rattled the global economy. As countries hit by the crisis face economic hardship, there will be more pressure on them from the international financial institutions to privatize their natural resources, to open up their land, and unblock its economic potential, forgetting that billions of people, communities, indigenous, pastoralists, depend for their lives and livelihoods on these lands. We cannot afford more structural adjustment programs that ignore the stakes of the climate crisis and social justice and move us in the wrong direction. Instead, the crisis must be used as a catalyst to address the systemic issues surrounding the rampant overexploitation of natural resources that has driven the climate crisis to its current stage. Returning to normal is not an option, but there is another path forward. Indigenous lands and waters represent 80% of the world's biodiversity, and there is growing understanding that local and indigenous communities are effective stewards of these areas. They are the final line of defense against land grabbing and destructive practices of governments and corporations that are converting family farms, grasslands, and forests into monocropped industrial plantations, large ranches, and stripped earth mines. It is essential that if you care about taking action against climate crisis, if you want to ensure end of poverty, if you want a different world, we need to join these struggles and stand up for land rights and indigenous land rights. Thank you.
Oakland Institute to support your work in campaigns or financially, or what we can do, because I think this is one of the most important words in the environmental movement, is to protect the land. Otherwise, people lose their land and they go deforest other area, or they incur in problems with the law because they try to squatter other areas. So it creates a lot of violence. So I think that if they keep their ancestral lands in their hands, they can continue their traditional farming, they can continue living the sustainable way they were living for centuries. So what is the best way to support your work, to connect with the Oakland Institute, and to engage in these campaigns?
Thank you, Miguel. Well, definitely you can learn more about these struggles on our website, which is oaklandinstitute.org. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter. But the most important thing, Miguel, is that we have to see these struggles as not local struggles. Whether it is the violence that the movement of landless workers are currently facing in Brazil, where nearly 400 families that have grown food for over 20 years are being forcibly evicted, or whether it is a struggle of the Ogiek people in Kenya, where the government would like to displace them and deny their ancestral rights. So we need to be supporting each of these struggles. We need to add our voice. In countries, in Western nations like the United States, we need to know that our taxpayers' money is being used to push policy prescriptions by our government on whether it's the World Bank or whether it is through MCC on Sri Lanka. So we have a campaign on our website getting the message to the Foreign Relations Committee that stop putting pressure on governments to privatize their land. Ensure that the governments can have their own agricultural policy where they can support the commons, where they can support the rights of the indigenous. And lastly, I would say a big threat that we face is of the 2021 Food System Summit. This has been taken over by AGRA, the Alliance for Green Revolution of Africa, where its president, Agnes Kalibata, is leading it. So this is really using COVID to push another pandemic, which will further embed the systemic inequities when it comes to land, when it comes to capital and markets for farmers, for protecting our biodiversity. So we need to be raising a voice, recognizing that we need a different world today.
Much again, Anuradha, oaklandinstitute.org. We have to connect with you, and we expect to organize more webinars in the future, like in a monthly basis, and maybe you can join us again and keep us updated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miguel. It was an honor, and look forward to listening to the other sessions.
Thank you. Thanks so much.